day, another real world test. Today, we're doing it on the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. And as per the usual, we're gonna kind of explore while we test out this phone. And today, we're kind of just gonna bounce around my neighborhood, I think. But before we do any of that, first things first. Coffee. Check. So this is Kafar, and it just opened inside the Hoxton Hotel near my apartment. Well, this is the lobby. That is kind of an extension of the actual Kafar restaurant on the other side of the lobby, but it's always been a great place to sit and get some work done usually. So now it's nice that they also have good food. Now, I've been to a Kafar before actually, in Philadelphia. So when I heard that that restaurant was opening a location here, I wanted to check it out, and it does not disappoint. Now, they're known for their Jerusalem bagels, which aren't really bagels. They're basically a Middle Eastern toasted bread with sesame seeds on top that's been kind of formed into an oblong circle, sort of reminiscent of a bagel, I guess. Either way, one way you can have them here is with egg and cheese, and it's delicious. Now, while we're here, let's chat about the S23 Ultra design and the screen. The S23 Ultra is very similar to the S22 Ultra, but the sides are flatter, which makes it more like the old Note series, which it replaced a while ago. So Note fans might enjoy that. I personally like it because it just kind of feels better in my hand, in my opinion. We also have a ton of color options actually when you include all of the Samsung.com exclusive ones like sky blue, lime, and red, which all look great to me. And I even like this green one that matches my hoodie that I didn't wear on purpose for that reason at all. Other than that though, looking at these two phones side by side, you'd have a hard time telling the difference between them. Now, even the screen is basically the same as the S22 Ultra. Not that that's a bad thing. They're both 120 Hz adaptive displays that can change the refresh rate, or how many times the screen refreshes the image on the display per second, from 120 times a second to have animations and gaming appear smoother, down to 1 times a second, or 1 Hz, to save power when viewing something static, like a photo. They're also super bright and easy to see in direct sunlight, and the colors and contrast on both phones are some of the best in the industry, honestly, which is pretty normal for Samsung, who is one of the few companies that makes their own displays. Now, the difference in the displays is that the glass on the S23 Ultra is slightly less curved, which I'm sure a lot of people will like. Now, it's not flat, mind you, but less curved. The idea for this, I think, was to make it easier to write on the screen with the included S Pen, as the S Pen can always kind of write to the edge of that curve, and so now it can just get a little bit further than the last one. Okay, while we're wandering around my hood, I figured I'd show you guys some of the murals in the neighborhood, and probably a good way to test the cameras on the S23 Ultra. Now, there are a variety of murals around this area that are all pretty impressive, honestly. There's a couple, though, that are by Edward Cobra, a Brazilian street artist known for his kaleidoscope designs and pop culture references. We have this one that is a depiction of a famous photo of Warhol and Basquiat wearing boxing gloves with the message of fighting for street art. And a few blocks away, we have another of Elvis Presley depicting when he was drafted in the Cold War during the height of his career, saying war is hell. Sadly, during COVID, this one got pretty heavily tagged, but hopefully someone will restore it eventually. And then there's another one down the road that's kind of become heavily associated with this neighborhood called the Mona Lisa of Williamsburg. It's actually a recreation of a photo that Stephen Paul called Lost Time. He was 17 years old when he took it and submitted it to the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards in 2014. All right, while we're admiring the street art around here, let's talk a bit about the cameras on the Samsung S23 Ultra. Now, on paper, at least, what you see on the S22 Ultra, you'll see very similar on the S23 Ultra with a few exceptions. So we have a very similar, if not same, ultra-wide camera, the same 3x optical telephoto camera, and the same 10x optical telephoto as well. But the primary camera is now a 200 megapixel instead of 108 megapixel. And you might look at that and go, 200 is greater than 108, so it's better. But it's not quite that simple. I might get a little technical here, but I'm gonna try to keep it brief. So suffice it to say that the number of pixels is great for sharpness, especially when we wanna blow up an image to, say, print it, for example. But for low light performance and just dynamic range in general, the larger the pixels and the larger the sensor really, the better. Now, a lot of manufacturers, including what Samsung is doing here, will bin the pixels together to create larger pixels, and usually they do this in sets of 4. So a 48 megapixel sensor with a pixel size of 1 micron, let's say, might combine each set of 4 pixels to get a 12 megapixel image with a 2 micron size pixel, and better dynamic range and low light because of that. And then they usually give you the option to shoot at that full 48 megapixels or whatever it is if you want. And you can use that when it's brighter out and you don't need the better low light, and maybe you want to crop into the photo later on. So in the case of the S22 Ultra, we had a 108 megapixel sensor with 0.8 micron sized pixels, but they were binned by default in sets of 9, so 3x3 squares, to get a 12 megapixel image with 2.4 micron sized pixels. For the S23 Ultra, we have a 200 megapixel sensor now that has 0.6 micron sized pixels, and it combines them in either sets of 2x2 to get a 50 megapixel image with 1.2 micron sized pixels, or 16 of them in a 4x4 configuration to get a 12.5 megapixel image with 2.4 micron sized pixels. Now, the sensor itself is a 1 by 1.3 inch sensor versus the 1 by 1.33 inch sensor of the S22 Ultra. So basically, from a pixel size standpoint, they're very similar, really. Now, of course, that doesn't tell the entire story, as image processing plays a huge factor and a lot of other things do as well. And even when you look at the ultra wide or telephoto shots from both of these phones side by side, there is a noticeable difference in the resulting image. And it'll be the same for the main camera as well. Also, the new main sensor can apparently fill each pixel using a new tech called dual vertical transfer gate with 33% more charge, which they say allows these smaller pixels to receive more of a full well charge before becoming saturated. Long story short, basically these pixels here are supposed to act as if they are 33% larger by being able to accept that much more charge. Now, lastly on this bit of a technical rant, sorry about that, the other downside is that if you use the 200 megapixel feature or the 50 megapixel feature on this phone, just like most other phones, when you select the full megapixel size of the otherwise binned sensor, you'll lose a lot of computational photography features, which in my opinion is what allows these arguably tiny sensors in phones to compete with much larger ones from point and shoots, for example. I even have a video on all of that at the link below in my decoder series, the explainer series here on the channel, if you're curious. Now, speaking of less megapixels, we have a new front-facing camera with 12 megapixels instead of the 40 that we had last year. And yes, even with that, this is an upgrade in terms of low light performance and detail. But the processing, you guys seem to like less actually than the more contrasty look of the S22 Ultra, at least when I posted this on social media. But with all that said, you guys tell me what you think of the photos from the S23 Ultra versus the S22 Ultra and the other phones that I'm putting up on the screen here as we go. This is Shelter. It's a cozy Argentinian spot some friends and I love to come to in winter to get wood-fired pizza or even empanadas, which are great. Have a nice glass of wine and catch up by their one of 2 wood-burning fireplaces. It has this like ski lodge vibe almost, and it kind of makes you forget that you're in New York City. Now, while I'm defrosting in here, let's talk about what changed inside this phone. Firstly, we have a new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset, but unlike other phones with that same chipset on the market, this one is marketed as for Galaxy. Essentially, we were told that Qualcomm, who makes the chipset, worked closely with Samsung to optimize it specifically for Galaxy devices. Now, as far as I can tell, that translates to an overclocked CPU and GPU, and then Samsung and Qualcomm made sure that the chipset worked well with Samsung-specific applications, not just Samsung-specific apps, but hardware applications like the camera's ISP and things like that. Whatever they did, the phone feels snappy as hell. Now, between the chipset and let's assume whatever those optimizations are that helped a little bit at least, plus the 120 hertz display, and the fact that the storage in here, by the way, is UFS 4.0, which is a newer standard for storage that's twice as fast as the UFS 3.1, which is what most flagship phones are using right now. With all of that said though, this might be one of the fastest feeling phones I've ever used. Things just load instantly. It's nice. Also, all of these things are now going to be the same overseas, as Samsung will be using the same chipset and setup, not just in the US, but outside as well. And besides the speed, these changes and the same 5,000 milliamp battery from last year, which in my opinion was good, are supposedly meant to bring better battery life this year as well. Okay, calling it a night. And here is my battery usage for today. Keep in mind, today's not a normal day. It was a real world test, so I filmed a ton. But I took it off its charger today at about 8 a.m. and it is 9 or so, and we are at 10%. Now, honestly, considering how much I used the camera today, again, it's a real world test day, it's very not normal. I have to say, I think this battery is pretty good, actually. I actually think it's better than the S22 Ultra, which I never had really any complaints about, but this one might be just a little bit better. So considering it has the same 5,000 milliamp battery, it's nice to see. Now, as always, I will leave the best price and deals that I could find on this device in the link below, but very curious what you guys think. With all that you've seen in this video today, the videos from it and all these other phones, the photos as well, what do you guys think about the S23 Ultra? Let me know in the comments below. Always appreciate hearing from you guys. Well, there you go. Hope you guys have a good night. Okay, while we're admiring the street art, there's literally a guy with a symbol around the corner. He's just hitting the symbol as I talk. Can't win. Bing. It'd be useful if I made a joke. You could be like, bum bum psh, but there it is again. Okay, while we're admiring the street art around here, He's doing a drum solo now, apparently, with the symbol heavily featured. But when we blow up an image, I don't even know what that sound is. I'm scared to look back, actually. It's like someone dragging a chain across the street. And the larger the sensor, really. Truck. Are you f***ing kidding me? So I actually came over here to avoid a truck that is pumping oil out of a restaurant from where I was originally gonna sit down and film this part. And he literally has come over here now and he's pumping oil here. That's that sound you hear. I can't win. But with all that said, you guys tell me what you think. Train.